service for late anti-apartheid activist and former ANC MP, that's Professor Ben Turok.
We are all to attain liberation and democracy, many of whom are not with us today, but like them and like many of us here, we have been at the center of one of the most powerful political dramas the world has ever seen. Comrade Turok's generation's single-minded devotion to the people of Africa has collectively shifted the nation and global community towards human rights and racial equality. Today's thorough depiction of Professor Turok, his life and his work aptly describes a visionary who led us through the vast expanse of political, social, and economic struggle. With the Freedom Charter as the roadmap, he helped navigate the liberation movement towards a struggle based on ethics, sacrifice, and intellectualism. Comrade Ben's history reminds us not to sink and drown into the political ocean, but to dig our feet into the sand and hammer with all our might against the waves of despair, to be buoyant and agile in our mindset and see through the sediment of insidious plots that aim to steer our ship off course. He reminds us not to divorce ourselves from our ongoing duty to apply our mind, question our motives, audit our successes, and scrutinize on a granular level our modes of operation. Through the eloquent and insightful recounts of Comrade Ben by his family, his son, Professor Ivan Turok, Professor Thuli Madonsela, and Comrade Paulo Jordan, we grasp an important piece of history and learn what kind of conviction and force drove Ben Turok. And we remind ourselves that history is important precisely because it gives us context and is a foundation for the project of social cohesion. To learn the lessons of our past, to understand and confront challenges of our present, and to have an honest and open dialogue about our collective future, we need to revisit history and humanize what it means to struggle. The late Professor Kgalema, who was a great poet, in his poem entitled "The Present is a Dangerous Place to Live," and I quote the last stanza in that poem, I quote, "Time will always be. Past, present, future is always now. Where then is the life we came to live?" Close quote. And he writes past, present, future as one word. Comrades, ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent sense of impatience in South Africa, a latent panic and unease that underpins our daily doubt, despair, and distress. This memorial service offers us connections to truths beyond an individual, a reflection of who we are, our wisdom gained, and our wisdom lost. A chance to become like Turok and be on the right side of history. When contemplating and appreciating the legacy of a selfless leader, we should ask ourselves, what do we inherit from this hero? Within one of Professor Ben Turok's final requests for a private ceremony rather than anything official or formal in view of the present predicament facing the country is a poignant metaphor for his selfless style of leadership and his approach to activism. We are exposed to his core values in this single statement and are encouraged to consider the heirloom of great leaders and examine the importance of social inheritance. The intergenerational transmission of Turok's ethics, attitudes, and actions must be the starting point of appreciating and celebrating the legacy of any hero. This is our inheritance. We are the heirs to the virtues of this revolutionary thought leader, shepherd of truth and struggle icon. In this and in many of Turok's public statements, he asks each and every one of us to re-examine whether what we are fed by the status quo is what we actually need. And in true Turok fashion, it is an ongoing criticism of passivity and of corrupt governance. In this, we may also interpret an appeal from Professor Ben Turok for us to challenge our social inheritance, not to accept the route that has been selected for us by mounting challenges and the hollowing out of leadership. Turok believed that government was not doing enough to pursue economic policies that ensured inclusive economic growth. He believed and understood that we are running out of time and that we need a radical approach to governing South Africa. Turok's robust opinions on the economy were shared and echoed at the inaugural Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum in 2018, a gathering of a broad cross-section of thought leaders and organizations including communities, governmental bodies, political groups, trade unions, youth, vulnerable populations, civil society, the international community and the private sector, to deliberate on important societal issues and engage in dialogue. These forums aim to ignite collaborative action and to address challenges was firmly met by Professor Ben Turok's potent observations in a panel discussion on the stage. His contributions included that self-enrichment and a departure from the strong moral values so eloquently captured in the preamble to the Constitution are at the heart of government's failure to lead and service the people of South Africa. His observations highlighted that South Africa has not clearly spelled out the economic legacy of apartheid and the inequality of wealth this created, which is perpetuated by the continued dominance of the apartheid profit model, and that there is unfinished business that has been pushed into the background by state capture crisis. He went on to warn that more research needs to be done on international institutions and the implications of foreign direct investment generally, and that we do not confront the financial sector players as we should, and that their policies deny, limit, and exclude many citizens from accessing requisite capital. Turok further calls for alternative ways of economic development, urges us to deal specifically with the economic legacy of apartheid, and that transformation is inhibited because South Africa is oversensitive to the IMF, World Bank, and similar institutions, and it is reluctant to change to economic policy that is not aligned with these organizations for fear that we might lose international respectability. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in nothing short of a crisis right now. The question of how to rebuild South Africa assumes that South Africa has, at one point in its existence, enjoyed status of a well-constructed and built-up society, economy and political sphere. The prolonged destruction that South Africa has been subjected to goes back for generations. This guides us to ask the question whether our country in some way experiences a constant state of being fractured or broken without opportunity to fully construct the South Africa of our dreams. The last period of troubled years have been dominated by a discourse that draws attention to the wide-reaching extent of corruption, dually intersecting in unethical business and political partnerships, crises in Eskom and other state-owned enterprises, and repeated demonstrations and social upheavals even along historical fault lines of race. We are constantly haunted by all of this. The project of social cohesion and nation-building efforts is under continuous threat. A dedicated commitment must be made across all sectors of society, government, business, civil unions, and communities to invest in a system of opportunity and inclusion for all. This distinct attitude and change will offer a concrete basis for the true development and construction of South Africa by providing the power to unlock our full potential. South Africa needs to look beyond familiar ways of doing business and understand that what has worked in the past is clearly not working today. There is no panacea to our socio-economic problems and to our financial woes. Eskom is South Africa's top risk. The crisis at Eskom threatens the entire country. State-owned utility can't manage to cover its costs and make the huge interest payments on its mountain of debt. Its poorly maintained power plants are struggling to meet demand, and it has lost many experienced chief executive officers, board members, and highly skilled staff over the years. Eskom can be described as the biggest risk to the country's economy. Corruption and mismanagement have induced the brain drain at Eskom and other state-owned companies, with over-regulation and availability of skills as a top concern. State-owned companies are not facing one single challenge, but a multiplicity of problems that, if not properly diagnosed, any turnaround strategy would only address symptoms that are on the surface. But time is not on the side of South African economy. Its impatient population and generation of youth counting on us to lay strong foundations for their future attest to this reality. In order to refocus these state-owned companies on the growth and developmental functions, the Pan-African Investment and Research Services offered the following recommendations to revive growth, with an emphasis on defining a set of programs and/or feasible interventions where state-owned companies could work together to create momentum for investments, industrialization, and job creation. The first of the recommendation is that there is a need for clear ownership policy that defines the overall relations and rationale for state ownership, the state role in corporate governance of state-owned enterprises, and how government will implement its ownership policy needs to be in place. And secondly, there should be constant monitoring and evaluation of these entities with focus on both the manner of their operations, how they deploy capital, and their development effectiveness. And thirdly, state-owned enterprises should justify themselves before the rationale of value creation for the public and with clear developmental impact. Where there is no clear comparative advantage or potential to develop it, and where there is no developmental value yielded, such enterprises should be allowed to die rather than be on an expensive life support. Fourthly, at the minimum, these entities should abide by existing corporate governance norms, including the Companies Act, Public Finance Management Act, and King IV Codes of Good Governance. For this to be possible, boards should be selected on a merit-based system and made up of individuals known for not only tested expertise, but also for their integrity and grasp of ethics. Finally, as the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development Guidelines on Corporate Governance of SOEs suggest, these entities should have a disclosure policy that identifies what information should be publicly disclosed and clear processes on obtaining such information. Accountability and transparency should be proactive. There is a general view that government ownership can have certain advantages such as furthering social outcomes as well as providing physical infrastructure. Yet it is indicated that it is vital that a value creation approach be followed as it provides a framework when considering whether government should have and or should retain an ownership stake in an enterprise. In addition to the recommendations to revive state-owned companies, it is important for us to look at the alternative methods of driving sustainable and inclusive growth. A sense of leadership during troubled times compels us to think innovatively, venturing out into the uncharted waters and bringing into the national fold new ways and eyes of looking into matters that, in the end, drastically changes the quality of life of ordinary people. At the 2019 Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum, we were left with a positive outlook that focused on South Africa's existing endowments as an important factor in economic transformation and revival. These include South Africa's strategic location, the potential of our oceans economy, and the vast deposit of natural resources as a substantial geographic advantage. Allow me to refer to the maritime world, blue or oceans economy, what Commander Tsietsi Mokgele, former South African Maritime Safety Authority CEO, referred to as South Africa's 10th province. With the discovery of oil on South African shores and South Africa being the only country on the African continent with such an expansive access and control over sea waters from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Southern Ocean, the Antarctic and Indian Ocean in the east, our maritime potential is extensive and the economic benefits are boundless. According to recent findings of the International Labour Organization, green economy policies could create around 40 million jobs worldwide in various sectors. Considering the green economy as part of our sustainable development path addresses the interdependence between energy production, economic growth, social protection, and the natural ecosystem. Within this, the private sector and civil society must play a fundamental role. These rich endowments of minerals, oil, gas, wind, and sun place South Africa in good stead as potentially becoming a continuing source of economic growth and influence in the continent of Africa. The world's eyes are on Africa as the next big economic growth story, and it is vitally important to ensure that this growth benefits all Africans. Agility in this ever-changing terrain is a fundamental element in developing modern business strategy. With South Africa's economic growth in the spotlight of emerging economies, we are the ideal springboard for the region not to simply be an observer in the evolving technologies, but to be a globally relevant participant in the fourth industrial revolution. Carving a space for public and private sectors to explore and design new workforce systems, we need to assist the workforce to adequately interact with new technologies, actively driving the digital era forward within all sectors of the economy. Our new reality is controlled by digital technology, and access to this technology is a universal human right. Digital inclusion allows people to access the economy, communicate freely, be ready for the jobs of the future, enjoy the rights to education, freedom of expression, health, and much more. It quickly becomes obvious why digital inclusion is so important and considered a universal human right. With the acceleration of digital technology driving change in every market sector and the necessity to adapt to these new conditions reaching increasing speeds, we must develop young talent through educational platforms that boost access to technology and develop digital literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Ben Turok rebelled against the pitfalls and traditions of contemporary South African politics and made a move to formulate a new theory of how the world should work. He asked of us to root out and discuss anything that, on reflection, results in negative influences, to continually test and challenge our existing mindset and refine and improve it all the time. In Comrade Ben Turok, foresight and rebelliousness are equivalent in imbuing him with a sense of uncanny balance towards life. In his autobiography, Nothing But the Truth, Ben Turok concluded, and I quote, "Indeed, it may be that throughout my political life in the ANC, I've been driven by ideas rather than practical politics, trying to move the process faster than objective reality allowed, close quote. In his objective to offer fresh ideas and create a mindset change among leaders, he inspired a movement of innovation and creative problem solving, essential qualities necessary for the 21st century and the energy needed to invent sustainable solutions to the challenges that face our communities. What Professor Ben Turok has left us with is an inheritance of ideas to assimilate, deliberate, and meditate on for many years to come. A legacy of firm and clear-cut guidance that reflects the hopes and dreams contained in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. He and his peers made the African National Congress the conscience of the nation. They demanded of themselves the highest level of ethics, discipline, intellectualism, and sacrifice. And so as I step down, once again, many thanks to Aunt Mary and the family for sharing Professor Ben Turok with us and the millions of Africans and South Africans. And I thank you all for your kind attention.